Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the New York book tag. So this tag was created by Jim over at Jim's Books, Reading, and Stuff, and he has a knack for creating fun tags around different themes, and he has created one for New York, and I saw this one going around booktube, and I thought I could do this, so here I am doing it. I wasn't tagged, but I'm not going to take offense to that. So these are prompts, of course, dealing with New York City. So let's begin. Number one, what is your favorite book set in or around New York? These kind of questions usually make me figure that Jim is asking about fictional books. And I've read some fictional books that deal with New York. One of my favorites I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit later in a different way. So instead, I'm primarily a nonfiction reader. So I figured I'd just spotlight one of my favorite New York City history books. And it's a popular history, but it's this one here. The Epic of New York City, A Narrative History by Edward Robb Ellis. I've read other things that are more scholarly than this, but this is a lot of fun. This was originally published in the late 1960s, and it of course has the trappings of that time period. Women and non-whites are largely invisible throughout this narrative, but he manages to move you through the history of New York from its beginnings and as New Amsterdam, all the way up really through around 1960 or so. It's a swift narrative. He packs a lot of fun anecdotes and stories along the way, and I mean, it looks like a chunky book. It's over 500. It's over 600 pages, but it doesn't feel it. You can fly through this thing very, very quickly. So if you're somebody who's never, who's interested in New York history and wants to learn a little bit about it, I wouldn't be put off by the size. I think that this would actually be a very quick, for me at least. I mean, it's been years since I read it, but I remember it being very compulsive reading as well. So that's gonna be my pick. This is, I have a lot of books on New York history on my shelves downstairs in the library, but this is definitely one of the ones that I had the most fun with, and one that I would easily recommend to those wanting to learn more about New York City history. So there's that one. Number two, New York is famous for its skyscrapers. What's the highest building you have been up? I'm guessing, actually, it's probably the Empire State Building. My grandfather was a train conductor. He went from Danbury, Connecticut to Grand Central Station, right in New York City, for years and years and years. I think from 1960s all the way up to at least the late 1990s. And when I was a kid, I would very frequently go with him. Ride in the train. I'd usually be able to sit up there with the engineer. I wasn't really supposed to, but they didn't really care. They would let me. And then I would walk around New York City with them all the time. And I know on at least one occasion, excuse me, a little bit of a cough here. I went with my mother as well, and we went up to the top of the Empire State Building. Not the kind of thing I'd be interested in doing these days, but as a kid, it was quite an experience. But that's probably the highest that I've ever been, and I'm not somebody who loves heights, so I'm not going to be climbing any skyscrapers anytime soon. New York, New York. This is prompt number 3. So good they named it twice. What's the last book you reread? Well, that would just recently be Beowulf. I had read this several times in different translations. I had never somehow read the Seamus Heaney translation, mostly because I just didn't have a copy of it. And because I already owned a bunch of copies of Beowulf, it just wasn't a priority. But I finally was able to get this copy really cheap secondhand and thought, this is the time. I had recently read a book on Merovingian history, which takes place during the same century that Beowulf takes place in. And it kind of whetted my appetite, and I went back to it, and I still love it. It's definitely one of my favorite reads, one of my favorite works. The character of Beowulf, the world in which he lives, the language of the epic poem. I love just about everything about Beowulf. So a very happy reread. I'm glad I reread it, and of course, I know one day I will read it again. Number 4. American Psycho is a disturbing novel set in New York. What is the most disturbing book you have read? Well, as I said, I'm mostly a nonfiction reader, and to me, nonfiction will always be more disturbing than fiction. I don't care what you put in fiction. If it really happened, it's worse. So the most disturbing book that I have read, and I don't mean it as like I was constantly disturbed, but the more you think about it, the more you sit with it, and you realize just what happened and how horrific it was. About almost 2 years ago now, probably, I read The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang, The Forgotten Holocaust of World War II. 1937, when the Japanese took over Nanking, and over a few weeks period, they murdered, just murdered in the cruelest, most disgusting ways, as though it was a leisurely activity, over 300,000 innocent people, men, women, children. It was just a wholesale butchery of people not recognizing another human being in front of them as a human being. What sort of racism and indoctrination can do to a person, what it can make them do. So it's disturbing on its own, this topic, but the author, Iris Chang, she killed herself after writing this. And there are many people who say that one of the reasons she kind of sunk into a really bad depression and maybe, took that final step is because of her research, because of this book. So it's a disturbing book on multiple levels. I'm glad I read it. It's fascinating. It should be more well known. Not just the book, but the event. It's grisly stuff, but it's absolutely important, and we should definitely not forget it. And that, to me, is disturbing. 5. Where were you when you heard about the news? Where were you when you heard the news about 9/11? So I was, I guess, about 20 years old. I was working as an assistant manager in a store in Connecticut. It was a retail chain called Tuesday Mornings. And it was called that because twice a year, I believe it was, we would basically close the store down for a month and restock. It was like an overstock store where they bought a bunch of high-end things from companies that had made too much and needed to get rid of their stock. And then they would fill the store up, and after everything was restocked, they would reopen a big grand opening on a Tuesday morning. So that's why it was called Tuesday Mornings. And we would open up super early. I think it was like, maybe it was 6 o'clock in the morning, if not earlier. It might have even been earlier. And there would be a line going all around, people coming in to get their stuff. Because once we sold out, we sold out. That was it. So 9/11 was one of those Tuesday mornings. So I'd already been working for several hours. It wasn't a very big store, a couple of aisles, but we had a line stretched all the way around the perimeter of the store. And I remember people starting to get alerts on their phones. Of course, they weren't smartphones, but they were getting alerts. That they had signed up for news alerts or something, or they were getting messages from their loved ones that one of the Twin Towers was on fire. And just like everybody else, we weren't thinking terrorist attack. We were thinking, I was automatically thinking single engine plane. My grandfather, the same one who was a conductor, he also late in life got a piloting license. So he used to take me up flying in one of those, the single engine planes. And we would not only fly around where we lived in Western Connecticut, but there was at least a few occasions he just flew me right over to New York City, and we would go around New York and right where the buildings are. So I just assumed that it was something like that. Somebody, maybe they were drunk, or maybe they had, a heart attack while they were flying or something and hit it. And that was kind of the conversation that people were having. And then people got the alert that the second tower was hit. And that's when you felt everything change in that store, and people's expressions changed. And we realized that it was an attack. And within about an hour, as things progressed, I remember people handing me their money, and their hands are shaking, and they got tears rolling down their eyes. They're on the phones trying to get in touch with their loved ones, because we're close enough to New York City where a lot of people can work in New York City and still live up in our area. This was a huge sale day, but by probably like 10 or 11 in the morning, it was just a ghost town, and we were closing the store early. And I just remember the parking lot being empty by the time I left. And, there were no planes in the sky, but you would see military helicopters flying overhead sometimes. You hear sirens, emergency vehicles. Again, we're not super far from New York, so a lot of emergency vehicles were actually on their way down to New York City. You could hear the sirens. And otherwise, it was super quiet, except for people listening to the news on their radio and just sitting in their car and listening to all this stuff unfold. It was like a surreal sci-fi experience. That's where I was. Let me see. Number 6. What is your favorite movie set in New York? Now, I had a lot of things I could choose from. I grew up loving Ghostbusters, of course. But my favorite movie these days that's set in New York is probably Rosemary's Baby. This was one of those books I was talking about that I really like that's set in New York. I wouldn't call it a favorite book necessarily overall, but I do like the book quite a bit. And I think that Roman Polanski does an excellent adaptation for this. I showed this to my wife for the first time a few years ago. I didn't realize that she hadn't really seen it before. And she asks me every few months or so to rewatch it. She adores this movie. And really, it's this young couple, Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse, and they get kind of a deal one of those deals that's like too good to be true. This really kind of nice Central Park apartment building. I think it's called the Branford. The rent is cheap, but it's a great space, and they're gonna maybe start a family. But of course, there's something insidious inside that building, and their neighbors aren't quite what they think. All of them witches, and it's in the movie, the real building, the Dakota, was a stand-in for the Branford. So I just always really feel New York when I watch this. Now it's a certain side of New York. This is more of a little bit of an upscale New York, but it's also the part of New York that I used to go around with my grandfather a lot. So it feels a little bit more nostalgic for me in that way. But I just love the movie overall. I think it's wonderfully written. The dialogue, the acting, how much is kind of going on in the background, that once you know what the twist is, and you watch it, second time, you realize how many things are occurring that aren't explicitly on the screen, but that you can piece together are going on behind closed doors, just off camera or in the apartment next door. And one of my favorite things is I have a pet peeve about terrible dream sequences in horror films. They're usually just used for a cheap scare to meet some kind of quota. They're terrible. I love the dream sequence in this. I think it does a perfect sort of perfect depiction of somebody hearing something while they sleep and then incorporating it into their dreams, and like through the lens of their subconscious and their memories. So yeah, this is definitely a favorite of mine. And also, the Dakota, for those who don't know, that's also where John Lennon lived and where he was unfortunately killed in front of the building. So whenever I'm in that area of New York, I always kind of go by the Dakota, for multiple reasons. Sorry, the more I talk, the more I cough. And that kind of relates to the next question. Have you been to New York? When was the last time you visited New York? As I said, I grew up going to New York all the time with my grandfather. I would often go with my mother as well, especially around Christmas time. We would go, go to like Macy's, see Rockefeller Center. We'd check out all the displays around Christmas. In my 20s, I used to go all the time, especially for concerts, go and see shows, or just go hang out in like Greenwich Village. Once my kids were born, or my son, I certainly didn't go as much. I took him at least one time when he was a little kid, but he was too young to remember it. And then of course COVID hit. So we finally, a couple months ago, took them to New York City. So it was the first time my son was old enough to remember the trip. So we took a train in. That's the easiest way for us where we live, and it's very convenient. So we took a train right into Grand Central. We took the kids to the public library, Times Square. Then we went to the American Museum of Natural History, made sure to see all the dinosaur skeletons. And then we kind of walked back through Central Park and up Fifth Avenue. And it was a great trip. The kids their feet were tired. They had very low tolerance for the amount of walking that we were doing. But just a few days ago, my daughter was asking if we can take a train into the city again. And she's 6. So she obviously liked it, I guess, even though they were complaining a lot. So we'll probably take another trip in soon. 8. Excuse me. Who is your favorite painter from New York? Or what is your favorite painting of New York? So I knew that I had seen certain types of painting from New York, and I didn't know who did it, so I had to go search and figure out who it was. I am not as up on my painters as I think Jim is, who created this. But the one that I really like, it's a French painter, and I'm gonna butcher his name because I don't know how to pronounce French. But I'm gonna anglicize it in a terrible American way. But Charles Constantin Hofbauer. Again, sorry for the butchery. But he spent time in New York City in the early part of the 20th century, and he painted scenes in New York that are they're very moody and atmospheric. They give New York this almost kind of gothic quality, but not overbearing. I think it's visually stunning still, and they're also very like snapshot like. They're real kind of like moment in time New York, and it's as out of all the different paintings I've seen of New York, those are the ones that I'm most attracted to and that I most like. Number 9. What is your favorite song about New York? Well, I'm gonna sound highly unsophisticated with this, but that would be New York, New York. However, not the Frank Sinatra version. My favorite version is from Gremlins 2, The New Batch. When all the gremlins are inside the lobby and the brainy gremlin starts singing it and all the gremlins are going, nah, 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 nah. I saw that movie first when I was like 10 years old. I think the movie's still underappreciated for the kind of bonkers live cartoon that it is. I just showed it to my kids a couple of days ago because they really wanted to see it. They've been carrying around a Gizmo doll with them for a couple weeks now, actually like playing Gremlins. And they loved it. They were cracking up. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. And they were kind of singing along. So, yeah, for lots of reasons, my favorite song about New York would be the Gremlins singing New York, New York. So, anyhow, that is my version of the New York book tag. I am going to tag Mark over at Book Time with Elvis. I don't think, excuse me, I don't think he's done this yet. I know he's been to the U.S. a few times. I'm guessing he's probably been to New York. So be curious to hear his answers. And that's it. So thank you to Jim, sorry, for creating this tag. And as always, thank you, BookTube.